Hey everyone, it's Karley Hall and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to engrave this cutting board. To get started with our design, you can use any design program that you feel comfortable with. I'm using Adobe Illustrator, but you can use free software like Canva, Inkscape, Silhouette Studio, and really the same principles that you will do in Adobe Illustrator should translate over to those other programs. I brought in an image from the product listing. You can also take a picture of your cutting board and upload it. I do think it's important to resize it so that it is an accurate representation of your image. So if I draw a line from this corner to the other corner, it's about the same size as my cutting board. So my cutting board width is around 18.2. And if you see, this line size is 18.14, so very close. That way, when I design my image, I can scale it to the size that I want and then cut it that same dimension and get a good preview of what it will look like. So here is a board I did, and I added this engraving in the bottom left-hand corner. I'll show you that a little later on. So you can see that I scaled it to the size I wanted, and now it's good to go. This next cutting board that I'm making, I am going to put their first names and their wedding date on here. So I'll show you what to do. I typed out their name, and you can use any font that you want. So just type out how you want it to look. And then we need to change the text so that it works with our laser. So before I change the text, I'm going to resize it down to the size that I want. I don't want it to be too big. I want it to be in the bottom left-hand corner, but you can place it wherever you think looks good. And then I want to thicken up these lines so that they're just a little more prominent. So if I zoom in here, you can see here that my stroke is on 0.8. I don't want to lose too much detail. You can see that I'm starting to lose detail in the E. So I might make this a little bit bigger. And we'll take it down to 1. So I do lose the inside of my E, and these are all things you just want to pay attention to, especially if you're selling your products, because those are things that customers may get a little picky with. So again, designing is up to you. I'm going to have it say established July 1st, 2023, their wedding date. And then I'm going to start by centering this to see how it looks. And sometimes I don't like how it looks perfectly centered, and I might just drag it over a little bit because it looks better between the D and the M. So you can use your design judgment and decide how you want it to look. Make it as close or as far away. And then once you're happy with your design, this is the part that we need to change to make it work with our laser. So if I were selling this board, what I would do at this point is I would screenshot it and I would send it over to my customer and have them proof it so that they can see that Mackenzie is spelled correctly, David looks good, and then it's the correct date. So that way you're not wasting a board before you send it to be engraved, and you can make sure that they've signed off on the product. And then add a note that says the engrave color will vary board to board. You can see on this board here, this is the exact same set of settings on both of these boards, and based on the wood color, you can see that they engraved very differently. So in your listing photos, I would also include a note that every product is handmade and the engraved color will vary from board to board. All right, so with that out of the way, let's change our font to make it work with the program. So if I were to click on my keyboard, Command Y, this is a font and the stroke goes away, and there's no path for my laser to follow. So I need to turn it into a path. So in order to do that, I'm going to come back into this view here. I'm going to click on my object and then right click, so 2-finger click, and I'm going to say create outlines. And you can see here that it created outlines of my font, but it did not outline my stroke. So if I were to try to engrave that, I would have little lines between every letter. So to avoid that, I'm going to come back up to Object, Path, and Outline Stroke. Now I have my stroke outlined and my font outlined. Open up the Pathfinder window, and I'm going to unite these. So now if I go back to that view, Option Y, the outline view, you can see that my font is outlined. It's no longer an editable font, and it is a path that my laser can follow. And that is exactly what we want. So we're going to do the same thing to establish July 1st. Start by right-clicking, Create Outlines, Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and then unite those together. To double check your work, you can go back to the outline view and you can see that now I have an outline of my Mackenzie and David and then the date. Like I mentioned, I did lose the inside of the E, so if you don't like that, you can steal the inside of the E from another letter. So if I want this one, I can make a copy, bring it over here and adjust it. So you can make some adjustments if you're unhappy with what your stroke adjustments did. So now I have the inside of my E. Now that our design looks good, let's export it so we can bring it into Glowforge. I don't want the picture of my cutting board, so I'm just going to select the name and the date, copy it, Command C, or up at the top, edit, copy. I'm going to make a new project here, and then just paste that in, Command V. One more thing before we upload this to Glowforge. I'm going to highlight everything and make it a compound path, so I can either on my keyboard click Command 8 or Object, and then down here compound path make, and you can see the hotkey Command 8. So I'm going to make that a compound path, and basically what that says is now all of this is one image, so it will upload a little bit smoother to Glowforge. And then I lied, one more thing. We're going to grab a rectangle. I just want it to be a stroke, and then I'm going to draw a box pretty tight around my image, highlight both of my objects, and then align them center so that my design is inside my rectangle perfectly centered. Okay, so now I can save it, head over to Glowforge. Here's a previous image of that cutting board that I already did, and now I'm going to import and upload my design. So to upload, just click that import artwork button and then choose your design. Since I made it a compound path, you can see how fast that uploaded. That was real-time uploading. So it's way faster to make everything a compound path and then upload it. And then this rectangle will come into play just a little bit later on. So to prep our board, you do not need to do this step, but I do like to do it. And I'm going to mask the bottom left-hand corner where I'm engraving. So if we look at the dimensions of our project, my width is 6.6. So I need a piece of transfer paper that's 6.6 inches wide, and the height will be about 2 inches. So this transfer paper is just a big roll of transfer paper that is similar to transfer tape, but instead of being plastic, it's a paper, and it will help reduce burn marks on our cutting board. So I'm just going to unroll a little piece and trim it down. Doesn't have to be perfect, it's just masking. And I'm just going to stick it on to the bottom corner, and I even can trim it off. I don't need this huge piece. I'm using a squeegee or a credit card or anything just to push it down. You just want to burnish it on pretty well. I'm going to pinch down the bottom edge so that I can see where that bottom edge is. You can trim that off if you want, or just make sure to pinch it down so it's nice and tight. And you can see that I have plenty of room for my engraving, and now I can load it into the Glowforge. For this step, I've already taken out the crumb tray. So if you're not familiar with the crumb tray, it's the honeycomb piece that sits at the bottom of your machine. So I've taken that out, and that's why you can see this shiny bottom. And then I have this speedball frame that is for screen printing, and it's the perfect height to lift my cutting board up. It's about 1 inch thick, almost exactly 1 inch. There are some fancy rulers that you can find online to determine how much you need to lift your material up, but since I do these cutting boards all the time, I know that this frame lifts my cutting board up to be the correct height, or in the range of correct heights. So you can use a piece of plywood. A 3/4 inch plywood piece works well for this thickness of cutting board. And then all I do is I butt my speedball frame right up to the front so that I know when I place my cutting board in that my cutting board will be straight. So what that looks like is when I drop my cutting board in here, I line my cutting board edge. You can either line it up to the corner or the edge of your speedball frame. So I just like to line it up to the edge and then kind of follow it down on the bottom edge. Flip this up first, then close that down and power on our machine. So now that my machine is powered on, it'll take a second for it to pop online. All right, so now my Glowforge has a preview of what's inside the laser bed. Before I talk about the settings, what I want to do is set my focus on the area that I'm engraving. So to do that, click these 3 dots, click set focus, and place it kind of like in the middle of where you think your design will be. That will send down a beam of light so that the laser can detect how far the material is from the laser head. And that will help us get a better, more accurate representation of what is inside our laser bed. So you can see the camera view dropped back. So now when I place my design, this will be more accurate as to where I want to engrave. Now, another idea that I was just thinking is if you put a padding around your rectangle of 0.25 inches or 0.5 inches, you could actually line up that rectangle edge with your masking tape. That probably would have been smart, but I'm smart after the fact. So I'm just going to eyeball where I want to place my design. And you can see how far it is from the edge, maybe a little bit further. And then before I engrave anything, we are going to do a test run and see where that ends up. So to do that, we're going to click this unknown here. Actually, no, we're going to ignore our Mackenzie and David, and we are going to score a manual score line. We're going to do speed 500 and precision power. We're going to knock it all the way down to 1. And what that will do is it basically will just be a beam of light, and it will give us a rectangle as to where our design will end up. So what that looks like is if I click print, it'll prep. It's going to take us 10 seconds, and that will give us an idea of where our design will end up. So looking on the laser side, I'm going to click the button and then you can see what happens. I'm not sure my camera will even pick it up, but right here there's just ever so slightly a little line, and it's about a pinky width away from the edge, and the bottom one is just less than a pinky. So I think I want to bring it up probably just a little bit, but you can see that I can use this as a tool to make sure everything is parallel, and that one's running parallel to the edge. This one is running parallel to the edge. So the actual design is straight. I just want it about 2 clicks higher. I can bring this whole thing up, and you can actually see that it was off. It's further over. I can just add 1 or 2 clicks up to make sure that my design is where I want it. So I don't need the rectangle anymore, so I can ungroup and delete that rectangle, or I can ignore it. And now we're going to engrave our actual design. So to do that, I'm going to click Engrave. And then I have these cutting board settings that I like, and those settings, it's speed 1000, precision power 100, and lines per inch 225. You can adjust your settings to look however you want. This is quite a few lines per inch. I like the detail. You can also do a speed and power grid to determine what settings you like as a reminder, some boards, depending on the color of the wood, will just engrave differently. So just note that every board will come out a little bit differently, and if you're selling these, to make sure to tell that to your customers. So now we are set to go. I already have my focus set, so make sure if your focus changed or you opened your lid to reset your focus. And now I'm good to send it to the Glowforge. So I'm going to click print. It calculated my time doing 9 minutes. The Glowforge is pretty accurate for how long it takes. So before I click print, I need to make sure everything's vented out properly. Okay, I have everything vented. Now I'm going to start my engrave. So as this engrave is going, I am standing in the room watching what's happening. I think it's important to mention that when you're working with a laser, there are certain laser safety things that you should just be aware of. Never walk out of the room that your laser is in when you're engraving or cutting. Make sure that you're kind of babysitting your laser, checking in to make sure that nothing's catching, especially when you're using something that's not a Glowforge proof grade material. So this, I could have a piece of masking lift up, the laser could catch it wrong and it could ignite a flame. So always stand by and watch your laser. If you don't have a fire extinguisher or fire blanket in your craft room or workspace, make sure to add that. I'll link to some of the fire safety equipment that I have in my craft room that I just like to have right underneath my laser. So if anything is to happen, I'm right here and I can extinguish any fire. So things to note when you're working with a laser in your home or studio. So my Glowforge just finished. I powered it down so you could hear me a little bit better, but I did want to show you how I vent my Glowforge directly out the window with an inline fan. So here is the controls for that inline fan, and if I power it on, it's pretty quiet. It'll start up in just a second, but it blows directly out of the back of my Glowforge and pulls all the smoke, all the smells right out my window. So I really have zero smell in here after engraving that cutting board. So if you're looking for a better fan than what your Glowforge comes with, I do recommend this fan, and I will link it. I just have an adapter on the back of my machine, which I can link to as well. Here's a look at the board right after it came out of the machine. So the masking is still on, and all you have to do to remove that is just gently peel it off. Kind of like weeding vinyl. See that burnt residue comes off and it's not left on your board. So that's why I like to add masking onto my projects before I put them in the laser. And then to remove the insides of the letters, you can use a tool. You don't want to scratch your board, so just be very careful. I just like to use my nail and kind of just gently scratch away the transfer paper. You can use a piece of tape and pick up all the insides as well. The last thing I would recommend is to take a baby wipe and just wipe down the surface. I just like to wipe it down until I have no more of the residue from the burn. For the person that is receiving this, I like to let them know to hand wash before use to make sure it's nice and clean, especially if you're shipping it or it's been wrapped. So hand wash before use and hand wash thereafter, so no dishwasher, and make sure to dry immediately after you use it. You don't want any water to sit on a wooden cutting board. And then you can use mineral oil, cutting board oil, to re-oil it if it needs it. So just wipe until there's no more soot coming up. Here's a look at the final board. You can see the engraved quality is really great. It's nice and dark. You can see that I did it on a darker area of the board. If I were to engrave up here, it would engrave lighter. So I can't stress that enough. The variation from board to board, even with the same cut settings or engrave settings, you could have a lighter engrave than what you see on my board, depending on the type of wood you're using. It's a nice deep engrave, and I think that the lines, the extra lines per inch, even though it takes a little bit longer, you can't see any of the lines because they're so tight together. So it looks like it's almost branded in there. So I think these settings are great. The placement is great. You can see that that border where I was able to line it up, it's about a pinky around. And I think that's a great technique to make sure everything's lined up where you want it to be before you send it to Engrave. So hopefully you found some new tips or you learned something new in this video. If you did, make sure that you like it and consider subscribing to my channel for more tutorials like this. I love these types of tutorials where you kind of get a look inside my brain and I just share everything that has been up here kind of just swimming around. So if you have any questions, make sure to leave those in the comments. Share this video with your friends if you found it helpful, and let me know what you want to learn next. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.